106.5 FM and online. It's the After 5 Guest with Wynne Thomas.
And time now for my After 5 guest, and that is Jane Fraser. Now, Jane was last on the show with her first ever collection of short stories called the South Westerlies. Now she's back with her first novel, Advent. Jane, thanks for your company this afternoon.
It's lovely to talk to you again, Wynne, but this time under very different circumstances.
Absolutely. I wish you were here, Jane. Now, Jane, lots of historical details in the book. Where did it all come from?
Well, I didn't set out to write an historical novel, and I'm not an historian and I'm not an academic. I simply set out to write a story about a family set in Gower, but obviously I wanted them to exist in a vacuum. I wanted to set it in a context, so I had to go from there. So basically I went to old photographs. The main character is based on a great aunt of mine called Ellen Thomas, who left a family farm in Llanryddion Gower to sail alone to the United States in 1899. And I had one photograph of her, nothing else. So everything else was made up about her. But I looked at ship's manifests, and I could see that not only had she sailed once, but she'd sailed twice. So she'd come home. She'd sailed in 1899 and she'd sailed in 1905. I didn't know anything else. I thought, there's some material for a story there. So the ship's manifest showed that she sailed on the Campania by Cunard from Liverpool to Ellis Island. So that was interesting. I also looked at census records to find a little bit more background about her family. So I found the 1891 and 1901 census records and found out a little about how many people were living in a home and how old they were and things in Llanryddion. So that was useful. I obviously turned to books, history of Gower, particularly Gower Gleanings by H.M. Tucker. That was published by the Gower Society in 1951, and it gave backgrounds on folklore and dialect and things like that. But the biggest larder of history has been oral history. My mother is from the village of Llanryddion. She's 91 and still lives there. So obviously her father is one of the characters in the book, and she had lots to tell me about that and about his sister and the house he lived with and where he worked. And also, I'm 66. You might not know when. Wasn't quite around in 1904, but I do remember my grandfather was born in that time. So lots of the information has been handed down through storytelling and that. Also, I've done a lot of walking. For you listeners then who perhaps don't know the story, obviously we don't know the story. It's set in Llanryddion and Gower and Lacher. So my husband and I did a lot of walking there, looking at where the old railway was, where the sites of old collieries. So looking at a side of Gower that's now gone, Gower with its industrial past, all hidden now, but another side of Gower that I wanted to bring out as a backdrop for the story of Ellen Thomas and her family. So in 1904, 1905, where the novel is set, just over 6 months from the December to the June, it was a pot of gold when I found that also was the time of the Welsh religious revival, and obviously its key player was Evan Roberts from Lacher. So I had another string to the bow then to put into the backdrop. Against the domestic story was this bigger picture of social change and religion and politics. So there was a lot there. But as I say, I'm a fiction writer, not an historian. So it was a mixture of the book is a mixture of fact and fiction, but doesn't feature historical characters apart from Evan Roberts. So
Right.
that's the background to the history there.
Okay, let's
Good
look.
enough.
So let's have a look at this. Then. Let me get a word in here.
Yeah.
So it's Helena, her mother, Jack and George, the twin brothers.
Yes.
William, Ellen's father, and my favourite character in the book, Elizabeth, the grandmother.
Elizabeth, the grandmother.
I loved her. Yeah.
What did you like about her?
She was a bit like my grandmother, actually.
Yeah.
Always sort of poking her nose in when it wasn't wanted in a way sometimes.
Exactly. She was. Yes, she was. She was based on my mother's telling of her grandmother, who was actually called Elizabeth. She was this all-seeing woman who sat in the settle in the corner, didn't say much, but took everything in, and when the time was right, put her two pennyworth in and stirred things up. So yes, I quite liked her, and it was interesting to have those 3 generations of women living in the same house as was the way. I mean, when the daughter married, she went to live with when Eleanor had married, she's gone to live in the family house, and she took on the farmer and his mother, and that's the way it was. So they were all there, and I think that's what's interesting in the book, is the relationship between these 3 generations of Gower women, really.
What's also interesting,
it's quite a warm relationship that I painted there.
Yeah, what also interesting is the way the Gower way of talking. That's interesting. There's some lovely phrases in there which you wouldn't sort of find today, you know?
That's right.
Yeah.
And as you said, you hardly hear a word these days. I do hear the odd word from farmers here. They sometimes refer to a ewe as a yow, and there are nicknames of characters. In this village, I live in Llangennych, called Tozer, which apparently was the old Gower dialect word for an apron. So I wanted just to put a little smattering of that, because it was dying out then, you know. But my grandfather actually used to speak a tiny little bit of Gower dialect, which is very similar to, it sounded very similar on occasion to West Country, I suppose, probably with the links by sea then between Devon and Cornwall, and I think Pembrokeshire has the same speech patterns as well, and he used to refer to me as maid, and that was quite interesting. So I got a lot of that, as I said, from what I remembered of my grandfather, but in that book I referred to, the Gower Gleanings of H.M. Tucker, he's got a lovely glossary in the back there of dialect words. For example, the white pot, one of the dishes that the mother prepares in the farmhouse, an old current dish, but remains in dialect. So it was an opportunity to put in words and to imagine a Gower that was, in terms of language as well, that is no more. And
the farming skills as well are in there as well, Jane.
Pardon me?
The farming skills are in there as well. You put
the farming skills, yes. Well, the Mount Pleasant farm that the book centres on in Llanryddian, in real life was the family home of my grandfather, one of the twins. As a child, in a very different form, I was back and forth to that farm, and I've got very, very deep memories there of my great uncle there, who was the farmer and the haulage person there, with the milking skills. My aunt used to still make churn butter in the dairy.
The main sort of gist of this story is, of course, Helen, who is back from America.
Yes.
So why is she back, and why did she go? Why did Helen go to America, and why did she come back?
Right, she went to America for a new start, to escape poverty. But I also hint that she escapes a disappointed love life.
Right.
That she can't bear to stay in Gower, where she's been thwarted by a local farmer. So she ups and goes in search of a new life and independence. And 2 years after she went, she was summoned home by her brother, because in the hope that she could save her father, who was an alcoholic, was gambling. This is fiction, not my family past. Was gambling large swathes of the Thomas land away and frittering their futures, and they hoped perhaps she could save him and talk some sense to him. So she came home one Christmas in the hope of that, but obviously she failed in her mission. So she was left then to pick up the pieces. That is the story of the book. To pick up the pieces of a failing family farm, to sort out debts. She was a bit of a meddler, a bit of a control freak. I don't know where she comes from, but she tried to do that, and so that she was torn. Then during the story, you see her torn between her duty to her family and her home, and also her dreams and her desires to settle in a new life, really. And she realises that whatever she does, there are downsides to being a woman and limitations to be a woman. But she realises that she's had, I think, a political and social awakening when she's been in the States, and she knows that perhaps her life will be better there. So, but whether she goes or not, I'm not going to give it. Whether she goes again back at the end of the story, I'm not going to say. I'll let you listeners find out there.
So you mentioned the religious revival in the book. Now, so you was a real person who Evan Roberts was.
Yes.
The meeting at Mount Pleasant Baptist Church, which is in the book, was that historically accurate, or was it something you made up?
When I realised that it was the time of the religious revival and Evan Roberts, I did some limited research. Obviously, there was articles in the Western Mail online, in the old Cambrian Swansea paper, talking about the fervour and how it was like an inferno. You know, I found that so exciting. Mm-hmm. So obviously, Evan Roberts was the real person. Philip and I, as my husband, we went to Lacha. We went to see the house he was born, Ireland. We went round to Maria Chapel is where I've set the meeting there, the preaching there. Whether he actually preached there at that time, just in January 1905, I don't know. But I imagine that. I mean, he would have preached in hundreds of chapels, way into the night, across South Wales, where it was packed to the rafters, from what I read. So that was an imagined scene.
And the cart journey described through Llangennith, is that fictional as well, or is that actually based on the route?
Sorry, I missed that. When?
I said the cart journey that's described in the book through Llangennith, is that fictional, or is that actually the true route?
The cart journey is all fictional. Right. I just imagine. That's what I found really interesting, writing historical fiction, how long things took and how information took to pass. But I just imagined Ellen and her twin brothers and the fiancé of one of her twin brothers, you know, setting off to Lacha, along the marsh, along the estuary, into Lacha on a Saturday night, just for the spectacle, just for the spectacle of seeing this man preach. Obviously, it was going to have it has different effects on all the people who saw him in the book. Ellen responds to him in a very, very different way than do her twin brothers and the fiancé. And I thought that was quite interesting. I wanted her to be quite a cantankerous, questioning woman, so that was quite interesting. And I also placed Ellen's elder sister Hannah, who, much to their mother's displeasure, had married a publican and ended up in a pub in Lacha. But of course, from what I read, and as you probably know and your listeners know, during the religious revival, a lot of people turned away from drink, and so I had that, you know, with the economic repercussions of that as a publican. So Ellen goes to visit her sister, and he's got no custom in the pub down to this Evan Roberts. So I thought it was quite an interesting
it was.
take. They're not my views on religion, but I wanted just her to have some views and to be involved in what I imagine a very atmospheric setting might have been in terms of revival, you know, with all that atmosphere and chanting. I've never been to a religious revival meeting in 1904, but I did go to an evangelical meeting in the Brangwyn Hall once with an American, a Puerto Rican evangelical Christian, and I suppose the feeling came from immersing myself in a similar experience where I saw all those people just acting in very, very incredibly emotional ways. You
Yeah,
know, it was.
yeah.
So I suppose that fed into the book as well.
Well, you capture the Welsh feel in the book. It's lovely to get that. It's a bit of a page turner, and of course we have a cliffhanger finish as well, which is great. I love that little bit at the end. So well done to
Oh,
that,
well,
Jane.
good. I'm glad it worked for you. I won't say what it was, but
Yeah, no, don't say what it was. We'll let people buy the book to actually find out what the end is. But it is.
Yes, and you know, I think it's got. You know, I hope people will want to read it, and perhaps want to find out more what happened to Ellen Thomas at the end of the book.
That's the skill you've put into it. That's the skill of your authorship there, which you've left us with a bit of thing at the end, what's happening at the end.
Oh, lovely. Thank you.
Well, anyway, then that's absolutely brilliant. Thanks for being my After Five guest again. Next time, I hope to have you in the studio, Jane, for your next book.
Well, it would be nice if circumstances change, that the world get back to normal. I'll have to write something else though, won't I, before I come in again?
Yeah, get another one, Jane. Yes, that's absolutely right.
Thanks ever so much for inviting me.
Thanks so much. Thanks for being my guest today.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.